All right, Dad, today is Wednesday, June 19th, and everything you've been talking to me about the past week or so makes me feel like we're in for a really hot summer. That there's going to be looks like there's some major events on the horizon. You're predicting a major offensive from Russia, and also you have been saying that Israel is gearing up for war with Hezbollah. These are two very big events that will basically things will shake out and see if we do go into a wider war or not. So maybe you could quickly tell us why you believe these two large events are incoming,
hmm
and kind of how you think they'll play out. So
Okay. Well, I think the first part is easier than the latter part, but yeah, I'll give it my best shot. Yeah, in reference to the Ukraine war, well, we've had, there have been indications of a Russian buildup, and there's a simple, for weeks now, for months. Um, we did have this new offensive in Kharkov, that started about a month ago, but it clearly wasn't the whole story. They just used a fraction of the forces that were available to them in that region. And there's more, and there you can see videos of tanks being shipped to the front lines, to the Sumy and the Kharkov areas. So there has been this expectation, but one event in particular has made me to think that something quite major is in the offing, that will take place soon, and that was Putin's speech, where he just laid out, made it clear as day, say, okay, look, if you agree to these, the war can end now. We can avoid, a continuation or an expansion of the war. And his preconditions were the withdrawal from and recognition of the four oblasts of Kherson, Zaporozhye, Donetsk, Lugansk, and of course Crimea. That goes without saying. Um, NATO neutrality, denazification, and actually also a lifting of the sanctions. Um, Now, I said that this is the last time that Putin did something like this, and it wasn't just Putin. It was followed by, statements from Peskov and other high-ranking Russian officials, pretty much repeating what you're saying, just making it crystal clear to the world that, look, we can avoid war if these requirements of ours are met, right? Well, last time that the Russians did that was before the SMO, and so that suggests to me that he is kind of feels like out of just a sense of kind of duty, and um, he he feels that he has to give the West and Ukraine, this option, this off ramp. He can't say, well, you were always in favor of war. He can say, well, no, at this point I gave them an off ramp. At that point I gave them an off ramp. And of course, I think he knows that it's almost certain that they're going to reject it, but he just feels kind of morally obligated to do it. Interestingly, too, it's not only that, the last time that he laid out his requirements so, explicitly was, in late 2021, just before the SMO. Um, this was also the first time since um, that same speech, in late 2021, that he uh, made a statement to I guess they call it the Foreign Ministry Board, where all of the top diplomats were assembled. So, it was similar in kind of in its content, but also in the venue. I think he's just making a point here. Look, this war we're going to entering into a new phase. We're about to, but we're giving you an option. We can avoid it if you meet these requirements. Okay, so anyway, that's Ukraine. I think there's strong reason to believe that there will be a major offensive soon. Could days, weeks, and there are indications of sort of that the front lines are heating up. There are parts of the front, like there's an area just north of Avdiivka, actually kind of between Avdiivka and Chasiv Yar, that has been very stable. There's hardly been any movement there for like the last 2 years. But just now, I think that the Russians have made a push and actually drove a few kilometers there. Now, whether or not that's part of some sort of larger ramping up or not is too early to say. But now let's move down to Israel.
Real quick before
Oh
we
yeah,
move
go ahead.
down. So if you're able to come up with this very reasonable analysis on why it looks like Russia might be preparing for a major offensive, then surely people in the West are probably coming up drawing the same conclusion, right? That okay, if we reject this peace plan, that there's likely going to be a major offensive. Do you think the West is thinking that way, the same way? Or they, because the response to the peace proposal for negotiations, it was purely, completely dismissive. Just get out of
Right,
here. Putin's a thug. We don't listen to him.
right.
Um, well, do you think Ukraine is, if you were Zelensky, you'd probably be shitting your pants right now thinking like, okay, right? And surely they're thinking about this all the time. They should be drawing a similar conclusion. Do you think they are? The West is,
Um,
or
I'm sure there are analysts in the West, that are. I haven't read any, Western mainstream analysis. I've heard from after I made that statement, I heard similar analyses from, other, let's say, dissident, which is
they
analysis.
probably copied it from you?
I don't think
Heard it
so,
here
but
first.
right. Um, but I would be very surprised if there aren't at least, some people like within the CIA and, similar intelligence agencies, throughout the West who are making this report, are presenting this analysis. But the question is, is it, well, first of all, is it really making it up to the top? I mean, that's part of the problem is that when these agencies become politicized, you may have, excellent um, people, in the um, at the lower levels of the agency, doing very solid analysis and providing good intelligence reports. But then, in a politicized agency, it's the people that rise to the top are the ones that say what the leaders want to hear. Now, of course, if you had intelligent, ethical people at the top who were really concerned about wanting to know the truth, they could change the situation. But that's not kind of people that we have at the top. So, maybe that the Western leadership, even if even if at the lower levels these reports are being generated, they're not hearing them, or even if they do hear them, they just don't want to hear it, and they just, it's just, they're so wrapped up in the narrative, and and their identity is being part of um, being,
Well,
part of the West, part of this, of
well,
this.
let's say they do hear it and they do think it's coming, and for their reasons, they've ruled out negotiations and diplomacy and peace. That's off the table. We're going to
Uh-huh.
fight this. What would they do anyways? What could they do differently other than some type of major escalation? What is it that Ukraine and NATO could even do in the wake of an oncoming major Russian offensive?
Right.
Like,
Yeah, well,
we
there's really
gave them
very
all
little
of
they
our
can do.
money, all
Right.
of these
Right.
weapons. What else is there?
Yeah. Right. Right. It's not like there are warehouses full of weapons that they've, so far neglected to give to Ukraine. They've been depleting stockpiles. They've been cannibalizing, the equipment from their own forces. And there really is not much left to give them, that they can afford to give Ukraine. Yeah. So anything of, of course, this is, the only option really is committing their armed forces, and it would have to be the U.S. because again, the Western European military forces are really so pathetic they really couldn't do much. We're talking about 10,000 here, 5,000 there, 20,000 there, and again, these people are not trained for this kind of war. I don't think they even want to fight it, and they're not particularly well equipped for this kind of war. So, I mean, the U.S. again, it's a big enough military. It has the problems we've discussed, but if it was actually, if we decided, to make a full commitment to this war, we certainly can have a huge impact. I think in the end we would still lose, but it would be, it would um,
It would
greatly.
destroy the world,
It could
right?
potentially, of course, it could. Yes, I mean, it could. Not necessarily, but it
But
certainly
that's not
could.
going to happen, right? I
Yeah,
mean,
I don't think so. Yeah, again, for the reasons that we've given, it's just that it's a very unpopular decision. It would not have any kind of popular support, um, and and then I think you have the few realists that seem to be left in these governments tend to be actually in the military departments and the defense departments, and they're probably saying, yeah, but no, we just don't have it. We don't have this equipment, or look, we're going to lose. And and if presidents hear that, they may say, oh, we can't. Maybe this will have to think something else up.
yeah. Well, the only thing that worries me is that it seems like every decision that the Biden administration makes with regards to foreign policy is the
Right.
wrong one.
Right.
So
Well,
it's
that's
like,
certainly, I agree, but they have exercised caution at different points. Again, we've talked about Iran. It was clear, when we're looking at the potential for war between Israel and Iran, that the U.S. did not want that to happen. And I
yeah.
think they did what they
Or
could to prevent it. And it
maybe
seems to be,
Maybe he was just sleeping for a long time and they just didn't make a call and it just,
yeah.
it,
Well, and then actually, we're going to get to talking about Lebanon shortly. But it has to be pointed out too that it's clear, from all the different information sources that I looked at, that the um, that the Biden administration does not want a war with Lebanon, between Hezbollah and the IDF,
but the
and
only
they're
problem
trying.
is it doesn't matter what we think, right? It's what
Yeah.
Israel
Well,
wants
what
and
they
Israel.
think, that's the problem, is
Yeah.
that at the end, it's just like the Israelis can say, well, who cares? We're going to do what we're going to do because we know we've got we control the levers of power back home. We've got the
Mm,
Israel lobby.
mm, right. Yeah, it's like having, a friend that's picking fights all the time and expects you to have their back. It's
Yeah,
not a good
right. And you're
situation to
fool
be in.
enough to always show up and finish.
Yeah, I mean, with Hezbollah, I think there's just this big kind of maybe it's almost slightly racist based roots to it that we just have this idea of like Hezbollah and Iran as being really kind of third world inadequate. These are just,
Mhm.
they don't have any fighting forces. So I think the world's going to be in for a rude awakening, especially here in America, when Hezbollah really ends up pounding Israel. Because I am confident that if Israel invades Lebanon to go after Hezbollah, Israel will lose. And then the US will have to come in. That's what will
Yeah,
happen. I don't think people need to understand where we are in modern warfare. The Iranians have more advanced missiles than the United States has. They have hypersonic missile, the Fatah 1 and 2 that can do evasive maneuvers. They're they've been striking the Iron Dome itself. The Hezbollah blew up an Iron Dome system. They are blowing up the best air defensive system with their rockets. Um, so what
right.
I like once again, it makes me think like if we're able to do this analysis and come up with this conclusion, like yeah, they won a war in 2006 and Israel lost against Hezbollah.
Mhm.
So surely the IDF Israel's making this kind has to be able to draw similar conclusions that we're drawing.
Right.
So does that mean do they think they can actually win this war, or is the plan just to get the U.S. involved?
Well, um, I think there may be a
Maybe.
little bit of both. I think.
Mm,
Um, yeah, it does seem okay. Just to because the initial question was, what is a escalation in the offing? Are we looking to, in
right.
the short run, are we going to have a real an expansion of the war in both of these areas? And we've finished talking about Ukraine. I think for the various reasons I gave, I think we will see that there pretty soon. And then yeah, there was kind of an increased talk about a conflict, about the possibility of an Israel Hezbollah war. And that hasn't died away. If anything, it's actually continued to heat up. And it looks like we seem to be right on the cusp of it. Doesn't mean that it has to happen, but it the rumors that like we're just a day or two away from it, that Israel is poised to begin both, air attacks and a ground invasion. And Hezbollah is saying, well, we're ready for it, whatever you throw at us. Um, yeah, it's interesting, actually. Yeah, well, the question is, why would Israel do that? You raise that question. Aren't they aware, that they're dealing with a much more formidable force? And I think, yeah, there is awareness. That's one reason why we haven't seen it yet. I mean, look, Hezbollah has been raining, rockets. That's not their best stuff. I think it's like their lower, um, the Katyusha rockets that are largely unguided, and some other missiles and some drones, but not with the best missiles in their arsenal yet. But just with these, they've basically emptied, the northern border region of Israel, and at least 60,000. You hear different numbers, 60,000, maybe 80,000 Israeli residents were forced to leave their home several months ago and are now, in hotels, and there's no way for them to return. And then it's in the meantime, Hezbollah apparently has been doing real damage. I mean, you get different stories, like um, I think the IDF doesn't really want to talk about, like, for example, damage to the Iron Dome or whatever, but we're getting a lot of reports that they have hit these military installations, including at least one strike, like on an Iron Dome system, close to the border. But yeah, their surveillance outposts, just much of their military infrastructure along the northern border. Um, and there was also a report that there was I think it was a Israeli F-16 was forced to turn around and go back because,
I heard
of,
that.
yeah. Now that's not confirmed, but that may be, that would be a big deal, because that's one thing that Israel's always had, is just this unchallenged air supremacy. So on the ground, like in 2006, as he pointed out, the IDF did very poorly. I was surprised by the strength of Hezbollah's resistance, the effectiveness of their resistance, and after kind of just um, struggling, very close to the border, eventually just gave up and pulled back. But in the meantime, the Israeli Air Force did a lot of damage to Lebanon's infrastructure. And so we're going to see. I don't know if Hezbollah has significant air defense or not, but that could be a big difference. But even if they
Yeah.
don't, yeah, I mean, Israel can do a lot of damage to Hezbollah, but at the same time, Hezbollah, in the meantime, since 2006, have really, all the reports I've been hearing for years and years, they've just been building up their missile arsenal, and they have some very sophisticated missiles that can strike deep into Israel and do really serious damage.
Right. And
But yeah,
they,
but still, Israel seems to be going ahead with this, and the question is, I think there's, maybe there is some of that arrogance. It's still hard for them to believe that they could actually be defeated by Hezbollah. Um, and but then they may just think, yeah, this maybe there's at least somewhat aware that this is going to be a tough fight, but they feel like they just have to do it because, again, it's exposing Hezbollah has been exposing their weakness, and they just feel like they cannot appear weak. They have to restore deterrence. And so they just may think that, okay, we just don't have a choice. We have to do this. And they're probably thinking in the back of their minds, if we get into trouble, the U.S. will help us. And they're probably right.
Yeah, and something that I think people also often overlook and underestimate is just the motivation of your forces and your troops. Hezbollah
Yeah.
is highly motivated. They've been training for this fight their whole life.
Yeah.
This is something that they've been really preparing for, and I think that will
Yeah.
go a long ways.
Well, and also it's that they're battle hardened. I mean, they've been fighting
Mhm.
ISIS and al-Nusra and, in Syria alongside the Syrian army. So these are people that they're very disciplined. Everybody like who's worked with them have said that these are very impressive, military units, very cohesive, disciplined, well trained,
Right. They're
and they
not
have
gonna.
real combat experience. And on the IDF side, I mean, if what we've seen in Gaza is, indicative of, what they're going to send up to into Lebanon. This,
IDF is in trouble. They're in
yeah,
trouble.
yeah. I mean, these people, there's obviously a lack of discipline, or they're, or you know, and the truth is that they haven't fought a real enemy for years. Maybe the last time was 2006. When they faced off against, and that was just a small portion of their forces. That was actually a fairly limited invasion. But most of these soldiers' experiences is actually, to be honest, is as an occupier. It's against civilians or rock throwing teenagers and
Small
places
arms
like the West
fire.
Bank or Gaza, and that doesn't prepare you for a real adversary. And they're going to meet a real adversary in Gaza. Not
Right.
I mean
In
in
Lebanon.
southern Lebanon, right?
Yeah. Right. Well, I mean that news story, let us know if it's confirmed about the F-16 being turned away because of air defenses that Lebanon might have, because that really is going to be a game changer. What we see is what the IDF really, how they really, 90% of the power seems to come from their Air Force, their ability to bomb any sort of, any place basically they want, untouched. If they can't do that, they're going to be in real trouble because when they go in with their ground forces, you see them get bogged down even in Gaza, fighting Hamas. So, yeah, if they don't have if they can't fly their air force with impunity, then it's going to, I think, be really bad for Israel quickly. Um, I like we saying, I'm sure more and more people will begin to come to this conclusion, and they'll come to it very quickly when this war breaks out, and they'll see what's happening. Um, and I think what we're going to start to see is just more and more people leave Israel as they become concerned, worried.
Uh-huh.
And I'm wondering if you're actually able to, do you know how many people have left Israel, or a way that we can kind of
Yeah.
count the people
Okay.
leaving? Because
Right.
I
I've
like to
heard.
think of,
Right.
well, I'm just really quick. Like I feel like Israel's, uh, their lifeblood is to get people coming into their country and saying that this is safe haven for Jews. If
Right.
that is, if the safe haven illusion is dispelled and people start to leave, that's like the people leaving. That's like their health bar. Once it gets too low, the state of Israel is going to collapse. So I think it's a very important kind of metric to be watching.
Yeah. Well, yeah. No, it is important. I've heard anything from 300 to 500,000 have left since October 7th, which is, that's a lot. What does Israel have a population of?
9 million.
Yeah, I was going to say roughly 10 million. Yeah,
But
something like
but
that.
but 20% or
It could be
uh,
roughly, yeah, anywhere from 15 to 20% like that. And that's a big part of the population of a country,
well,
right?
yeah, I was going to say
Yeah.
20% of the Israeli population is Palestinian,
Okay,
or
right,
more so. So we're
right.
talking about maybe 7 million.
It could be. Okay.
So
Yeah.
I,
No,
I
so
don't know.
that's
I'm just I
right.
actually
Yeah,
don't
but
quote me
there
on
are
those
many
numbers.
more that are dual citizens. And right, when push comes to shove, a lot of those people may leave. You're right. Many have left already. We're talking not an insignificant fraction. Again, this is something that I know others have pointed out. Like when uh, back in the fall of 2022, Putin announced the partial mobilization, of 300,000 Russian reservists. Something like 300,000 Russians left the country at that time. And the US made a huge deal about it. And now, actually, from what I understand, is that most of these people have returned. At least half of them have. And again, your sister knows one of these people. He took off and then he's back and he said, "Oh, that
Got to
was
be a little
stupid." Yeah,
embarrassed,
right.
right? Coming back
Well,
like,
part of it is a lot of them actually just trusted Western media sources. They weren't even going to be, you know, they weren't part of the mobilizer. He was mobilizing reservists, people who already had served and had certain skills and whatever. And a lot of these people ran off, weren't even eligible to serve. But um, anyway, but even so, that 300,000, that roughly 300,000 people that ran off, young men mostly, that was a much smaller percentage of the Russian population than what we saw in Israel. But of course the the Western media didn't exactly shine a light on what was happening in Israel. But it could become, the numbers could go way, way up if a serious war breaks out between the IDF and Hezbollah, and if missiles start raining down on Tel Aviv, or, that could just change everything. That's because they haven't really seen anything yet. I mean, it could be.
Right. Yeah, I guess the thinking in Israel is just that they have to do this now, because the longer this goes on, then they don't establish that dominance. They'll just going to slowly bleed out. So they have to, like you said, reassert that dominance right away. And maybe the longer they wait, they're also seeing Hezbollah get stronger and stronger. So that I
Right,
feel like they feel like this is the only way out, is we have to strike now. Maybe we get lucky, a quick decisive victory, but it's okay because we're gambling, but we're using daddy's credit card, which is
right,
America. So
right,
if it doesn't work out, daddy will bail us out. And I think that lends to more moral hazard. I mean,
right,
if we
certainly.
took that away, maybe
Yeah,
because really the way to stop this war is actually pretty easy. They just need to stop what they're doing in Gaza. They need to pull out.
right,
They need to
exactly.
give
Well, that's
Palestinians
why,
time.
right, that's why Hezbollah has been, firing these Katyusha rockets and so on. You know, they, they've said that it will end when you pull out of Gaza.
Right. It's so frustrating because there is the correct moral ethical decision to be made here. It's so easy for
Right,
so many of us to see. It's like, yes, just stop the killing. These are people too. They have
right,
families.
right,
They deserve to live. Like,
right.
let's stop this madness. Same thing in Ukraine. Like, here's a peace
Yeah,
proposal. Let these people live.
right.
They voted in a referendum to be part of Russia. They speak Russian. Just let them be. You can live your own life. Go back to, get on your PlayStation and play games and have a good time. Go out and try to date a girl. Live a normal life. Why can't we do that? But we're in a situation where we're backing clearly the immoral party. We're supporting both of these. The only
Right,
reason
right.
both of these issues exist,
Yeah,
and that
right.
the
Well, I think,
moral correct
yeah,
path isn't taken, is because it's
right,
because of America, and it's
right,
very frustrating
right.
that this is us, and we're becoming the pariah of the world, and everybody's just going to hate
Yeah.
us.
Well, yeah, in all these places, yeah, both Ukraine and Israel, and I think you can say in Taiwan too, it's just the involvement of the United States has really warped domestic politics.
Mm,
It's encouraged the what they call, the extremists, the maximalist, the ultra nationalist factions in those countries. Has made them grow, uh, become much more powerful than they ever would have become otherwise. If it wasn't for us, if it wasn't for our guarantees, um, they, I think, oh yeah, again, peace would have been possible, probably would have been achieved in all these countries, um, because people would be forced to be, realists. It's just like the maximalist um, option wouldn't really be on the table. You just look at it and say, well, that's clearly impossible. And the only reason that it still is on the table is because we have the U.S. whispering in their ear saying, yeah, we backed you. And they can go there and say, in negotiations or in elections or whatever, is that we've got the U.S. at our back, and therefore victory is ours. Um, of course it isn't, but they're led to
yeah.
believe that with awful
Well,
consequences.
my hope, I mean, maybe a way out of this is that if Russia wins a quick, decisive victory from their major offensive that you believe is going to come soon in Ukraine, that it will kind of just shift the balance of power. Like in such a clear way that I think it will have a big effect on Taiwan, and hopefully Israel will see. Just because the Taiwan and Israel, they think they got the ultimate super weapon, the United States, behind them at any time, so they're invincible. But then they realize, oh, this weapon isn't as good. We see that there is a greater weapon in town, and that's Russia. Russia really has catapulted itself to, in the minds of a lot of people, as the most powerful country in the world in some regards. Most people still believe the U.S. is, and there's a very good case to be made in many ways. But after this Ukraine-Russia war, a lot more people will be thinking the other way, and that will have an effect, I
Yeah.
think, on the Taiwanese, and hopefully, but we'll
Yeah,
see.
we'll see. We'll see. Well, again, even, without um, the impact of the Ukraine-Russia war, I think, any of these thinking people in any of these regions or countries um, should know better than to rely on the U.S. for ultimate victory. I mean, because there are other historical examples in the not too distant past, Vietnam, Afghanistan, countries that decided, or at least factions within those countries that decided that they were going to, um, yeah, simply, just accept those American assurances of ultimate victory, and with the terrible consequences, a lot of lives unnecessarily lost.
How did we become the bad guy?
Yeah, well, maybe it's, what was it, Lord Acton that said that, um, yeah, power corrupts, but absolute power corrupts absolutely. I mean, I think it's, at the end of the Cold War, we could have kind of retreated gracefully and returned to being, what we were always meant to be, a republic, and be that, uh, um, um, and not an empire. But the decision was made. There were people, of course, who fought for that. Um, I think Pat Buchanan is one of them. He could certainly say, back in the 1990s. But it was the other faction. It was the neoconservatives that won out. They say, just no, we can't. Now that we have ultimate power, now that we are the unrivaled superpower, we have to make use of it. Of course, it's all for the good of the world, but that's all tied up with, little love of power, and that love of power, it really corrupted us.
You think then in this new world that we'll be living in the next 5, 10 years will be a more peaceful world? I mean, that's what a multipolar world should hopefully be. I mean,
Yeah,
because the fear is like, will we enter into a new Cold War where both Russia and China are ramping up their militaries and we're trying to ramp up ours here?
yeah,
Because then once it gets big, then what it will it end up corrupting China and Russia? They have these powerful militaries, and
hmm,
now they want, and then there are forces trying to drive it moving forward because
yeah. Well,
twenty
it's true.
percent of your
There's no
economy it just
right,
starts to heat
right,
up.
right.
But
Well, it's true. I mean, that nobody, you can't say that any country, any government's not immune to the same kind of temptations, let's say. But I don't think, there's any chance. It seems to me a realistic chance that Russia, at least in the foreseeable future, let's say in the next few decades, is going to achieve that kind of unipolar dominance, and then maybe begin to kind of contract this. We'll call it the unipolar disease, that the U.S. is suffering from, which is really just say, this fixation with global hegemony.
mm,
Um,
yeah, I
so,
mean, what
again, who knows? Maybe a century from now, we'll see something similar, and China will be behaving like the U.S. state, but I don't see that in the next couple of decades anyway.
right? Well, I mean, just when you see what BRICS is about, it 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 lends to a brighter future, in my opinion.
Right,
It's about, you do no sanctions. Every country can do its own thing. We're not
right,
imposing things. We're not
yeah,
activists. You're
right,
your country. You do you. We do us. It's a
right,
nice arrangement.
right.
So I hopefully that's the
Yeah.
world that we're
Well,
moving
at the
to.
present time, that's one thing you have to, that's correct. It's just like the U.S. has this hegemonic ideology, which they call it by different names. It's the international community, the rules-based international order. But it clearly is not tolerant of um, different systems, different ideological paths of development. It just simply it is, this is the one um, um, it is a universalistic ideology, and that is being spread and enforced with a great deal of zeal. Um, and now, what both Russia, China, and let's say all the members of BRICS, what they're pushing for is not like an alternative universalistic vision. Okay, it's like, if you join we have, our own set of beliefs, and then everybody needs to subscribe to them. But rather, okay, what they espouse is multi-civilizational order, right? It's just that each civilization is free to pursue its own civilizational path. So, the Indians are free to be Indians. And, if Hinduism is central to being an Indian, that's really not for us to dispute. They're the Indians and that's their part of the world. And the Chinese, if they're Confucians, let them be Confucians. And if it's, with the Russians, it's Orthodoxy or whatever. But all of them, and you see this in the speeches, that Putin gives and Xi Jinping gives. It's not that they're, again, pushing their own particular vision. They want, everybody needs to be a Confucianist, or everybody needs to be Orthodox, or everybody needs to be a Hindu,
or a democracy, or whatever.
Yeah, right. Well, that's the opposing vision. Is that you're right? There's this one, it's democracy, but it's also a very particular understanding of democracy. It's even a democracy that, let's say, a generation ago, there's something we would have thought is kind of alien. Now it has all these woke elements to it. If you becoming part of the club, for example, if you want to join,
wave the pride flags, like
exactly. I mean, that's not an exaggeration. You are expected to do that, right?
Because it's a human rights thing, and they keep on changing what the human rights are.
Right. It's a very particular definition.
Dead
so you have to have a gay
pride
parade or whatever.
Right.
I mean, that's part of the process of joining the club, and so it's just all very, and they're intolerant. Like when you get Hungary or something, who has tried to put the brakes on some of that. I mean, they pretty much threaten, we will destroy you. You cannot. It's unacceptable not to join the club, to subscribe to all these elements of their ideology.
Yeah, and the Swiss Peace Summit, I think, was a great kind of vote on these two systems. That's really what it was. We're America, we're a democracy. This was a democratic vote. Basically, do we support the Western club, or are people or countries looking at something else? And that's what we saw. We saw basically the majority of the world and all the big players, China, India, Brazil, but they all were not wanting to sign this communique of the basically this ridiculous ultimatum for Russia, and so the world is open to that. Everybody wants to be part of BRICS now. It seems like.
Yeah. No. It seems like there's a new applicant every day.
It sounds like such a great thing to be part of. I really like that. It's just let everybody be their own thing. Let the Chinese be Chinese.
Right.
Let Russia be Russia, and that's great. Okay. Anyways, you sent me a clip earlier of President Duda. I figured I just watched it once, but we can go ahead and play it, and then I can just hear your comments on it, and then we'll just take it from there.
Sure.
All right. You ready?
Yeah.
Okay.
The Kremlin intends to enslave the Ukrainian people, their children, use Ukraine's resources, destroy their culture, and deprive Ukraine of the right to freely choose its development path and security arrangements. In the part of the world which I represent, Russia is often called the prison of nations, and for good reason. Because it is home to almost 200 ethnic groups, most of which became residents of Russia as a result of the methods used in Ukraine today. Russia remains the largest colonial empire in a world which, unlike European powers, has never undergone the process of decolonization and has never been able to deal with the demons of its past.
All right. Pretty strong words.
Yeah, yeah,
Where do you even start? Well, a lot of stuff packed in that 1 minute.
yeah, right. The prison of nations. Yeah, yeah, that's okay. Yeah, that's not just some weirdo. That's the president of Poland. Um, and yeah, the things that he was like what he was saying there has been echoed by the presidents of the Baltic states, um, and by some of our think tanks here in the U.S. talking about the decolonization of Russia. That means breaking up Russia. That's this is it's not just regime change or a change in course, but actually breaking up Russia. Now, um, yeah, he's referring to the fact that there are a lot of different ethnicities within Russia. We know about the Chechens, there are the Cossacks, there are various Mongolian and other kind of East Asian groups.
Mhm.
Now, I think they'd be surprised to learn that they're in need of liberation. That they're actually prisoners within Russia. And one thing when he mentioned that, I just thought of the recent Russian presidential election. The region in which Putin got the highest winning vote was Chechnya. It was something like 98%.
Yeah, they
And
love them.
yeah, right.
They
I
love
mean, and
them.
that's nobody really is going to dispute that because look, they're there fighting on the front lines. They're very enthusiastic supporters of Russia. And then the second highest percentage was one of the Mongolian republics. It may have been the Tuva Republic, where former defense minister Sergei Shoigu came from. It's almost entirely the people there are basically Mongolians. It used to be a part of Outer Mongolia, and
Well,
there was like 97%. And I remember seeing recently, there was just watching a video about a hero coming back from the front lines in Ukraine. He was a Tuvan tank commander who, his tank. Actually, I think he got in a duel or more than a duel. I mean, he took on several Ukrainian tanks, including, Western tanks, and destroyed them all. So it was like, I can't remember, it was 1-6 or something. And he just turned around, fired, destroyed all the tanks, and it was a celebrated victory, this little tank battle. But he went home a hero to the Tuva, and you could see him coming there. They had a big parade and the dancing girls and singers and a big billboard with pictures of Shoigu and Putin, and you could see these people were very, very proud of their, of their native son right there. I mean, this is the so-called prison of nations. I mean, there's just nothing in there that made anybody who really knows Russia, has been to Russia, just knows that it's completely false. It's hard to believe that they're so misinformed. But I guess, sometimes hatred or whatever can just so distort your perception of reality that you don't even, you completely lose track. I'm kind of thinking about somebody in a bitter divorce or whatever. They just got to make out the other person to be a monster. And to the point where, you start hearing this person, I don't know what you're talking about. I think like a few years ago, you knew that wasn't true, but they just their hatred warps their perception of reality to such an extent that it just like,
well, it's just funny the choice of language because basically, you're saying all these ethnicities. It's like, oh, great, it's diversity. That's the
yeah,
number
right.
one thing, right? You guys love that. You want as many different
Yeah,
ethnic groups in there as possible.
right,
And then they use the word instead of diversity, they call it a prison of nations. It's like,
right,
are
right.
you saying that we need to divide, segregate everybody by their
Yeah,
ethnicity into
right.
their own nation because we can't have diversity? Isn't that
Yeah, right,
antithetical to the whole
right.
Western project?
Yeah.
It's
Well, I think it actually, I mean, just the fact that, hey, look, that, the Chechens are very strong supporters, the Tuvans, and so of the Russian government. I think, we talked about multi-civilizational and a multi-civilizational approach, right? That's what we find on the BRIC side of this larger conflict. Um, but it's not just between countries, but even within a country. I think that's the approach that Russia has taken within the Russian Federation. You say, okay, there are these autonomous regions, and they say, you do things differently there. There are certain laws that we all have to follow, whatever, but you can preserve your culture. We're not going to go in there again and make sure you have a gay pride parade or whatever. You do what you think, what's appropriate to, your people. Like, for example, the Tuvans are largely Buddhists. Say, okay, and only 0.5% of them are Orthodox. Okay, but you're Buddhist. Shoigu is a Buddhist. This is something that we're not going to try to suppress Buddhism or even to change it in any significant way. You're free to embrace your identity within this larger framework of the Russian Federation. And I think that's why you've find such positive feelings. They've prospered. At the same time, they have a sense of being their own people, but they're very thankful that the Russians have provided this kind of larger environment in which they can prosper.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's kind of what the U.S. was supposed to be. We were a federal system, right?
Yeah.
And we didn't, so it's ironic that what you're saying sounds like something that what I thought America was supposed to be, so. Yeah. Okay. Anyways, that it's almost comical listening to that speech when I heard it. I wanted to laugh, but it's also very frightening.
Right.
And I actually got one other clip for you. It's Putin's speech. I'm sure you heard it. I actually cut it from Judge Napolitano's Judging Freedom show. So there's a Judging Freedom banner on there. Don't get mad at me, Judge Knapp. I'm sure you'll be okay with it. But I think it's a very important speech, clip from his speech that everybody in America should listen to. Everybody in the West, I think, needs to hear this. It's a shame that more people don't hear this. Okay.
Lastly, the self-centeredness and arrogance of Western countries have led us to a highly perilous situation today. We are inching dangerously close to a point of no return. Calls for a strategic defeat of Russia, which possesses the largest arsenals of nuclear weapons, demonstrate the extreme recklessness of Western politicians. They either fail to comprehend the magnitude of the threat they are creating, or are simply consumed by their notion of invincibility and exceptionalism. Both scenarios can result in tragedy. It is evident that the entire system of Euro-Atlantic security is crumbling before our eyes. At present, it is practically non-existent and must be rebuilt. To achieve this, we must collaborate with interested countries, of which there are many, to develop our own strategies for ensuring security in Eurasia, and then present them for broader international deliberation. This is the task set in the address to the Federal Assembly. To outline a vision for equal and indivisible security, mutually beneficial and equitable cooperation, and development on the Eurasian continent in the foreseeable future.
It's very clear, less than 1 minute, just everybody should listen and understand what he's saying there, and then think about what Duda was, president of Poland, was saying about decolonizing and breaking up Russia into these ethnic groups, just the dangerous game we're playing. And he also touches on the vision of his multipolar world where people can live in peace and pursue their own, their own civilization. Like you said, it's a beautiful concept in my opinion. I don't know, any thoughts or comments on that video?
Yeah, well, no, it's what he said, it's absolutely true. I mean, this desire to inflict a strategic defeat on Russia is not only is it foolish, it's much more than foolish. It's just really insane. I mean, if you actually succeeded at it, the whole world would be at risk, because as Russia has made clear, and I think any sane observer of the situation would understand, if the very existence of Russia was put at risk, if Russia was, if this mad dream of Duda and others could actually be realized, or, Russia would begin to break apart. If we ever reach that stage, I think we really would see nuclear war break out. I mean, that's where it could really happen, where it's almost likely to happen. So what are you doing? What are these people who talk like this should not be in any kind of positions of power, but they are. It's, you can say, well, that was just Duda. Okay, but Poland's a considerable country. It's an important part of the EU, an important part of NATO. Okay, the Baltic states are small, but the thing is, like when he made the statement, to my knowledge, nobody corrected him. It was this is something that, and he and others have been making these kind of statements for a while. And now the Russians are hearing them. And, how are they supposed to respond? They understand, like clearly Putin made it clear, they understand the threat. They understand, the very, these, this absolute insane delusion that has gripped parts of the Western elite. And, so they're proceeding accordingly. I think, this is what has led us to where we are, why we have this war, why this war is going to continue. The Russians know that they cannot be defeated. They know what these people are after, and they see that their very existence is at stake. So, that's where we are.
Oh, it's scary. You've some of these forces, once they build up and it starts moving, it just sometimes it just feels like they won't stop. Even though we know where this leads, the outcome could be absolutely catastrophic. But
yeah, it's kind of like a nightmare, where you see something happening and you're completely powerless to stop it.
Right.
It's got to, both in Israel and this and in Ukraine. I'm not saying that it definitely will end this way. Again, there are reasons, especially in the case of Ukraine. It's just, I think, because of Russia really does have things under control and has the upper edge. People like Duda are simply going to lose. Now, I think that that's what's going to happen, but it's going to be a very scary process, and there are going to be times when, the whole thing could spin out of control. And again, in Israel, though, I just don't really see the off anywhere. It just seems like it's,
yeah. Well, I think, it could be soon. It could be any day where we'll see some major move, a big step, with Lebanon, major offensive in Ukraine. We're coming close to the final chapters. I'm getting
I don't know if
scary.
it's the final chapter, but I think it's just the next chapter, which is going to be scarier than the previous one. That's
sure, right.
This could go on for a long time.
New chapter, right? Yeah, I should say final chapter, but yeah, right. It could be the end game of the finishing of book one. Act two might start up, and it could be a scary one. Okay, well, Dad, I think maybe that's a good place to stop on that cheery note. So. Okay, thanks a lot, and we will talk again on Friday.
Happy Friday, right?
On Happy Friday, right? Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.